Hi, and welcome to Basics of CATIA. In this video, we're going to cover the general layout of the CATIA program, locating tools, working with some of those tools, and some of the basic functionalities that you're going to be dealing with. So let's go ahead and get started. As you can see, I'm still on my dashboard here, and I'm in my collaborative space. This is a collaborative space I created just for this called Team 1. Managing your collaborative spaces here is important, as this is just a practice model that we're going to be working on. You're going to want to make sure you get this in the collaborative space you want it in. So if there's a collaborative space that's specifically set aside for practice or demonstration, this might be the right place for you. Moving forward, as you begin to put together your own models, you're going to want to make sure that those are all located in your team's space to save yourself some time. So let's go ahead and let's open CATIA. To get to CATIA, I'm going to go to my 3D modeling apps in the Compass. Now I have my CATIA programs right here at the top, but since you may not have that already, I'm going to come and find it in the list down here. So here we're going to start in assembly design. Now you can start directly in part design if you want to work on just one individual part, but I want to start in assembly design so we can start practicing some of those skills that will help you put your model together in a way that's going to save you a whole lot of time down the road. Now I'm just going to go ahead and jump straight into 3DEXPERIENCE because it takes a few minutes to boot. So go ahead and pause the video if you need some extra time. Alright, so here we are in CATIA in the assembly design app. You can see that listed right up at the top here. Now this is what's called a native app, and all that means is that it's actually installed on your computer. As we move through the different tools that are available to you here, you'll actually see our app change throughout the process. But let's go ahead and talk about the layout a little bit here. Now before I get started, I want to make sure that I point out that this is designed to give you just some of the basics for using this tool. There's a process that you'll want to be familiar with called relational design, and that's going to be covered in another one of my videos. Make sure that you watch that video before you begin on your own project. It'll make a whole lot of the other things I do here make some more sense as well. So let's go ahead over the layout. Down here at the bottom is what's called the toolbox, and this just has all of the different little tools that are going to help me with assembly design. And it's organized into sections, which you can see by these little bubbles up here. Now this is the streamlined layout, which offers the least amount of information. I actually prefer to go with labels, so I'm going to right click on the toolbox down here and just activate both of these options, just to give me a little bit more of a description of what I'm dealing with here. That's going to make it a little bit easier for you to do as well. So now we get a little bit better view of the toolbox, and I also want to bring out what's called the tree. If you see over on the very side corner there, there's that little arrow. Go ahead and make sure you click on that, and that's going to bring out the tree, which actually shows how my parts are organized within my assembly. So again, we started in assembly design, so it opened, by default, it opened a new assembly for us to work in. And this is what we're going to use to organize the parts that we're going to be working with here. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is we want to start adding content to our assembly here. There's two ways to do that. Notice we still have some of these buttons up in the top right corner, but the buttons have changed a little bit based on what we're dealing with here. So since we're in CATIA, this add button, I can actually use that to insert new content into my model. If I open that up, you can see it has some of the most common parts that we deal with and a whole list of other options down here that I can add as well. And since I have the assembly over here selected, and that's indicated by this dark blue box around the name, that's where any parts that I add are going to go. But I actually prefer to do this in a little bit more straightforward way, at least in my opinion. I'm just going to right click on the assembly icon over here, come down to insert, and I'm going to insert a 3D shape, this white chair looking thing. And it's going to make sure that I'm inserting the right thing, and I'm just going to select that to say OK. And now you can see that's been added to my tree. Now while I'm over here, let's add a couple more things. So I'm going to come down and insert. I'm going to insert a new product. So that's essentially what that becomes now, is a subassembly. And into this subassembly, I'm going to give it a 3D shape. I'm going to go ahead and select that and confirm. And I'll insert a 3D part as well. And as long as I'm over here, let's go ahead and rename this assembly. So I'm going to right click on it, come down to Properties. There we go, and it gives me this option to rename it. So I can just call it Practice Assembly. And it changes the name right there in the tree, as well as the tab to tell me that I am working on the Practice Assembly now. Alright, so let's talk about what I just did there. We have three different types of objects up here. We have an assembly, we have a 3D shape, and we have a 3D part. These are just designations that help me deal with the items I have saved in the tree, as well as help me save these as parts within my collaborative space. So an assembly is a pretty straightforward thing. It's essentially a collection of parts. And into an assembly, I can add sub-assemblies, I can add parts. I could add a part directly into this assembly instead of inserting one into this specific sub-assembly, and also 3D shapes. A part, which is designated by this blue chair here, is basically a placeholder in the tree to say that everything located under this blue chair is part of the definition of that part. So right now the only thing in here is a 3D shape, which got added to this part by default. But I could also have things specific to this part, such as a drawing, a material, other aspects that might have to do with the definition of the part, but maybe not necessarily its geometry in space. And that's the difference here between the physical part and a 3D shape. A 3D shape is going to have your volumes, your geometry, any of those aspects. So let's go ahead, and I want to edit this part. So to do that, I have to select its white chair, its 3D shape, and make sure that you keep that straightforward when you're working on that. What you notice is when I selected this white chair, it sent me automatically into part design. If I come here and select the blue chair, it's going to leave me in assembly design, and I'm not going to be able to change anything about this part's geometry. So let's activate the white chair here, and we'll get us to part design. And that's going to let us actually start making things. Alright, so here in the middle you see this set of planes, and every 3D shape comes automatically with these set of planes. So we just have one in each direction. And essentially, to start adding geometry, what I'm going to do is select one of those planes, and then I'm going to come down here and select Position Sketch. And it's going to automatically place me perpendicular to that plane so I can sketch 2D geometry on it. Notice again, it shifted me into the Sketcher app so that I can start dealing with these tools here. And I'm just going to add a circle here. I'm going to place it right on the center there, stretch it out. And now we have a nice little circle here. Because I place the point of that circle, the center of that circle, right on the axes, it's actually defined that, it's fixed that in space. So I can't move it off anymore. I'm actually trying to drag this right now. I can't move it off that point. But I can still grow and shrink the circle. So I'm going to define that circle. Notice when I click on it, it pops up a couple of useful tools. One of those tools is this constraint tool, which you can also find here at the bottom. And that's just going to automatically apply a diameter, and I'm going to give that a size. I'm just going to say 100 millimeters. And now I've defined that circle. Now something that I haven't shown you here, I'm going to go ahead and delete that again so I can show you this. I'm going to put on another constraint, and as I'm kind of dragging it around, it assumes I want a diameter. But I can just right click and come down to radius, and it's changed the definition into a radius, and I can leave that off to the side. Now notice now I've fully defined this circle. I can no longer stretch it, no longer move it, because I've defined the center point and I've defined the radius. It's fully constrained. When something becomes fully constrained, it turns green, or the sketch turns green to indicate that. Now if I come here and I can try to put on another constraint, and it's going to by default assume that I want a reference constraint. Now, reference constraints are nice in that they don't actually drive the geometry, but you can use them to get some useful measurements off of your part. I can change this into a diameter in case I'm more interested in the diameter, but I still for some reason want the radius to drive that. Now again, it assumed that it wanted that as a reference, but if I come in here, I can actually change, I can double click on this and remove that reference measurement. And now what's happened is it's turned purple. And what purple means is it's simply over-constrained. And the problem here is if I can come in here and try to change this measurement, it's not actually going to let me because it recognizes that this is over-constrained. So keep an eye on that as well. I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And that's essentially it for the sketcher. Now these are just the basics. There are plenty of other tools down here to help you create more interesting geometry. And if you click on any of these drop-down menus, you'll get plenty of other hidden tools here that you can use. Again, you can always check up on those on 3ds Academy or in the documentation. But I'm going to go ahead and exit the sketcher for now. And we're going to focus a little bit more on this ring. Now this is probably a good opportunity to teach you the mouse shortcuts for navigating around your parts in 3D. So essentially what I'm doing here is if I hold down my middle mouse button, I can pan around my object. If I then press the right mouse button as well, I can rotate. And then once I release that button, it sends me into the zoom tool. And that's essentially it for moving around. I'm going to be doing that a lot, so it's a very useful thing to know how to do. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn this into a three-dimensional object. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to come down and find the pad tool. Now we're in the essentials part of the toolbox, and that's just the most used tools throughout part design. You can also find these tools if you come into some of these more specific sections. This one's model, so it has a lot of these three-dimensional modeling tools as well. Transform, refine, review. As you can see, there's a lot of them, so we'll try to keep moving here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pad this sketch. Now, if you've been using SolidWorks or some other CAD program, you may be used to the terminology of extrude. In CATIA, an extrude means to extrude just the outline. In other words, you end up with a circular surface, a cylindrical surface, rather than a solid volume. And so in CATIA we make that distinction between pad and extrude. So we're going to go ahead and pad this one, and we can go ahead here in the box that pops up. I'm going to give that a dimension. Let's say it's 50. And I can also pad in two directions at once. I'm going to click on that More button, send it over here, and I'm going to give it a dimension in the other direction. Let's give it 20, and let's hit Preview. Alright, Preview shows what that shape is going to look like. And that looks good to me, so I'll hit OK. Alright, now notice as well, the way that I'm dealing with this shape right now, I have the background here actually has a surface, and my shape is casting a shadow on that. If I don't like that, I can change it just by right-clicking on the background and coming to Ambiance. And there's a lot of different options here. This White Design tool is one that I'm fond of. It gets rid of that background and also gives me a little bit of an idea of how big this object is. So that's a pad. Let's go ahead and do a pocket. Essentially just the opposite. I'm going to remove material instead of adding it. So first thing I need to do is create another sketch. So I just selected the top face here, and I'm going to come in and put another circle. And let's go ahead and constrain that. And I'm going to double click on this constraint tool, which just keeps the constraint tool active while I'm working here. So I hit 20. Now notice it's still active. I don't have to go down and pick it again from the menu. Set both of those in. I'm just going to do both of them at 20. We'll give this a diameter of, 17 sounds pretty good. Alright, now I have my profile for my pocket, so keeping that selected, I can select pocket. And there's many different ways we can do this. We can give it a dimension to find how far it goes. I can say up to next, and it'll go up to the next face it runs into. I can say up to last, which if I had more material down here, it would cut through that as well. Plane, surface, etc. I'm gonna make it a blind hole. So yeah, 50 millimeters down, just a blind hole into my shape. Now you can see that material's been cut out. And that's a good way to do it, and I can do whatever profile I want by way of the sketcher. But let's just put in another hole. Let's use the hole tool over here. I'm going to select that hole tool, and it gives me a lot more flexibility with what I do. So I want to position the hole. So I'm going to do a positioning sketch. So let's move this point out to somewhere where we can see it. Again, I'm going to double click on that constraint tool and select these axes. We're going to go 20 again, and 20 from this one. This is just going to set the center of the hole. All right, I'm going to hit exit. Now it's placed that hole. And now we get to define how the hole is cut. So first thing you should notice here is it's got this V-bottomed hole right here to mimic a drill bit. And I can set that to a flat-bottomed hole instead. By default, it assumes a drill. That's just here in that dialog box. I can set a depth. Let's set that to be 50 as well. Let's go ahead and get a diameter. I'm going to go 17 on this one as well. I can hit preview to see how big that makes it. We've got two equal-sized holes. And there's a lot more I can do in these different windows here. So I can come in here and do type. I can make this a countersunk hole. Go ahead and preview that. I can set the depth and angle. I can also change this depth and diameter, angle and diameter, however I want to define how that's countersunk. I can also do counterbore. Give that a diameter of, let's say, 25. And select preview. There's a counterbore hole as well. And I can add threading if I need to add threading to this hole. Now notice as I select threaded there, even if I hit preview, you're not going to see the actual threading in my 3D model. They're still there and they're still defined, but essentially all this is trying to do is save you some processing power on your computer. It takes a lot to show all of the ridges of a threaded hole, so it ignores that in the model. If you have a particularly powerful computer, you're welcome to change that preference, but I'm not going to do that here. Alright, so I'll hit OK. That essentially covers the basics of the hole tool. Now there are other things you can do in there, including using standard threading, but I'm not going to go over that in this video. Now I mentioned preferences just barely, and this is probably a good time to go over that. If I come up here to my name, my little bubble up here, I can come down here and select preferences. And if you have had any experience with CATIA in the past, then these menus shouldn't come as a total surprise to you. But just under preferences, under general and parameters and measure, this is one of the most common things that people want to change. I can change out of metric into English, units, or any other standard that I want to use. I would say though, make sure before you go changing your units, see what kind of a standard your competition or your project is supposed to use. You're not going to want to go back and change these after you have your model put together. So I'm just going to leave those alone. There's a lot of other options in here which you can learn about. Alright, so we've got our holes. We've used our pocket and our hole tool. Let's check out some of these other ones. So let me come down here and I'm going to select this, this plane here again, and we'll put another sketch on this. I'm going to show you our shaft tool. So I'm going to come down here, I'm going to put a rectangle in space this time. Again, do some constraints. And I should show you this. I can drag this out and use this axis right here, but you notice this thing that blinks up, that's the center line of this rounded shape, and it comes up anytime I'm floating over this curved surface here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just select that as my center point, and we'll set this to be 200. And I can do the same here. Use that constraint tool. We'll set that to be 175. Alright, notice these two lines have turned green because they're fully constrained in space, but I can still move these vertical lines up and down. So we need to define them as well. We'll select that, come up to this axis in the middle, and Yeah, let's say 40. And I'm going to do that again for this guy up here. Actually, this one, I'll just get that distance there, and we'll call it 80. All right, let's exit that app. And now we can go ahead and create a shaft. Now a shaft basically is going to take this profile that I can select there, and then it needs an axis, so I'm going to select that central axis here again, and it's going to rotate it about that axis. Any angle that you want, I'm just going to let it go all the way around, and we get a nice little ring that way. In the same sense, I can create a groove, this tool down here, which is essentially just the opposite. This one removes material instead of adding it. And let's just do a quick measurement here. We're going to make this be 180. And we're going to give these sides some measurements. Now, since I'm just taking away material, it doesn't actually matter all that much how big this square is, as long as I'm sure it cuts into the ring. 15 is great, which means I want to make this 30. All right. Let's cut out of that, and then I can hit groove. It selects that sketch that I had. I'm going to select that central axis and hit OK. Now we have a nice little groove cut out of our ring. All right, so that's a lot of the most basic functionality that you're going to have in CATIA. The last thing that we're going to cover is just doing some fillets and chamfering to this shape. So all I did was switch from Essentials into the Refine tool, which is just kind of going to clean up this, this design. And I'm going to come down here and select that Edge Fillet tool. And select the edges that I want. And you see here it's giving me a bit of a preview. It's using a radius of 0.5. I can come in here and set that specifically if I want, but let's see what that looks like. Now that actually looks pretty good. I can change that if I'd like to, but that looks pretty good to me right now. So hit OK on that. That just kind of smooths out that edge. Then on the inner side here, I'm actually going to do this in reverse order a little bit. I'm going to select these lines by holding down Control. And now that I have them selected, I'm going to come in here and select Fillet tool. And now that I have these lines selected, I'm going to add a chamfer. And let's preview what its default is. Now that's too small. So let's see, we need it to be more than a millimeter. 45 degrees is good though. Let's set it to 5. Alright, so we've set it to 5, hit preview, and we've added a bit of a chamfer on the inside there. Alright, and that should give you all of the basics that you need to get started in CATIA. Make sure you keep watching these videos and check on the documentation to learn some of the other tools that we want to teach you in the future. Thanks.